Welcome to the Lead to Win podcast. This week, we visit with Ben Gutman, marketing entrepreneur, author, professor at Baruch College, and co-founder of the Digital Natives Group, about communicating with clarity. I'm your host, Bo Bergen. We have a great show today as we visit with Ben Gutman. Ben is a marketing entrepreneur and educator who has helped hundreds of clients ranging from the NFL to Nobel laureates, from I Love New York to #1 New York Times best-selling authors. He is a co-founder of the Digital Natives Group, which has worked with more than 60 authors. Since 2014, he has taught at Baruch College and has been a full-time community leader in New York City, active in Long Island City Partnership, Queens Economic Development Corporation, Queens Community Board, and Queens Tech Night. Please welcome Ben Gutman to the show. Ben, warm welcome to you, and thanks for coming on the Lead to Win podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Bo. Great to be here. I appreciate all those things. A couple of things have changed there, right? So I sold my agency, Digital Natives Group, about a year ago, but I guess I'm still technically a founder of it. That part doesn't change.
Yeah, that's true. I would always leave that on your resume for sure. So we covered a little bit of your journey in the intro, but kind of give us an overview and help the listeners better know you on your background and your story and what's kind of led you to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned a whole bunch of items there. So I went to Baruch College, actually. I was an undergraduate there. And when I was there, I was a big kind of student government dork. And I was the president, doing all the, student council things. And I was very focused on that, not so much focused on my career, to be honest. Luckily, I had a professor who reached out to me and said, "Hey, I know you kind of want to maybe start a business, starting your own thing. We need some help with digital. Maybe we'll figure something out." And he ran a marketing agency up in Westchester, so kind of just outside of the city. And lo and behold, a few weeks later, I was my beat up '94 Honda Accord, out of the city every single day to slap our logo on the wall and work in their basement. It was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed that. But I was kind of like a knuckleheaded, 22-year-old or whatever, and I was working with a few friends. I worked with like the local ice cream shop, the local camera shop, those type of things, and we kind of cut our teeth learning these small business pieces. Bit by bit, we started to get slightly bigger clients and slightly bigger projects, and we eventually moved out of that basement to a neighborhood called Long Island City in Queens, which into this funky old industrial space, and then from there, we maybe hired a couple employees, and then we got a bigger office, and then we had bigger clients. And then by the end of it, by the end of 10 years, we were working with the NFL and Comcast, I Love New York, all these other, wonderful clients. And then we decided to sell them. Then we decided to say, hey, after 10 years of doing this, do you want to be doing it basically for the next 10 years? And nothing was wrong. We had good revenue and everybody was getting along, and we could have kept doing it, but at some point you're going to get the itch a little bit to say, well, let's explore what else is out there. So we sold the business about a year, almost 2 years ago at this point, and we were lucky to find a home where every employee had a job, every client had a home. And since then, I've been working on a whole bunch of other different things. I wrote this book, Simply Put, Why Your Messages Win, How to Design Them. Just came out a couple months ago. I've been working independently on a number of different projects. You mentioned a few of the other kind of portfolio life things I do, like I teach, and I'm on a few different boards. And all of that is a lot of really fun stuff that keeps me busy.
Absolutely. So today's conversation is about communicating with clarity. And before we get into it, tell me a little bit about how just the overall importance of communication within an organization and how it helps it operate more effectively.
Yeah. So one thing I would see time and time again, because this is the reason people hire marketing agencies, is that they have something to say. If it's something about a book or something about their product or a cause or whatever it is, and they have a hard time kind of getting it out and getting it into the heads of other people. Like that's the core challenge that people hire a marketing agency for. So I would see this over and over again. And the thing I would see that was the commonality between all of these different instances was that when the organizations had the hardest time getting there were the ones that complicated things, the ones that refused to to get simple in a way that receivers, if that's a buyer, a voter, a donor, whoever, that they need to hear stuff. They were focused on themselves, not on the other side of the equation. And when I'm in the thick of things running the business, you kind of just solve things as they're coming from you, and you kind of intuitively get stuff. But now that I've had some time to step back in it, and that question still is ringing in my head, which is, why does some messages work and others don't? Well, that's what led me to end up kind of writing this book, where I wanted to investigate that at a deeper level than I ever have before.
So obviously this podcast is, geared toward leaders and people who want to be leaders. Leadership is about relationships at the end of the day. How can leaders use effective communication in order to strengthen those relationships with the people they lead?
It's communicating explicitly in terms of the emails you write and the presentation you give, the speech you make, as well as the kind of subtler forms of communication, like body language and your actions. All of those things basically combine to form leadership. So if we are able to focus on how we can improve communicating, well, then we're going to end up improving how we are as leaders.
So speaking of the employees and the relationships, what have you seen, or how do you feel that effective communication affects the morale of the organization as a whole, or the employees within the organization?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think one of the most important things I would see this in our own ages, our own work, and other teams that I've led has been you have to feel there has to be a clarity of purpose. That's the most important thing to communicate as when you're in that leadership position, which is why is it that we're doing the things that we're doing? If there's just, you're coming to the company because you got to do some work and you get the paycheck and you go home. Well, that's fine. You can make a pretty good business doing that, but you can't really, you're not going to build a team that people are going to want to be a part of. You're not going to build a company that's going to change the world. You're not going to build a campaign that's going to defeat the Goliath out there. But if you come to it and say, well, the reason we're here to do X, right? We're here to do Y. And that's what you're leading with, instead of the other bits of profit, of process. Well, this is a pretty kind of well-established principle, but that is ultimately what moves people. Now, I'll back up a little bit also, and kind of, if you give me a second, I'll talk about the where that type of thing falls apart. So what I've looked at when I try to figure out, well, why is it that sometimes that type of message or other messages don't get across, is that, well, it turns out that senders and receivers are kind of in these two different camps, right? So I mentioned the receivers before. That's the customers, the buyers, the employees, whoever. The senders are the entrepreneurs or the executives or the marketers or the politicians, whoever. The gap is that when we're receivers, we want things to be fluent. So we know the word fluency. You can be fluent in English or Spanish, Mandarin. Where we're fluent, things are easy, right? That comes from the word flowing. And there's a whole host of, when you ask a cognitive scientist about this, there's a whole host of research that points to fluency being associated with all the things we want. We want people to buy and to trust, like, follow, and those type of things. When things are fluent, we do that. When things are not fluent, well, we don't trust, we don't buy, we don't vote, we don't choose, and we like. And so that's not what we want. So we want things to be fluent as receivers, but as senders, we're built to complicate, right? It's being a leader or being a marketer is kind of the same thing in many ways, because we're pulled often by all the forces around us to add, to do more. But that is ultimately to pull us in the opposite direction. And then internally, we have a bias towards that as well. When we're tasked with creating something or changing something, we're much likely to add than we are to subtract. So there's that gap there, which is that when we're receivers, we want things to be simple and fluent. When we're receivers, we have a really hard time getting there. And this crops up in leadership. This crops up in internally and externally in political circles, in marketing circles. All these problems end up kind of being found in that gap.
So when you think of an effective communicator as a leader, or really any effective communicator, they have a sense of confidence about them as well. How can a leader develop that confidence so that they can become a more effective communicator and communicate with more clarity?
Right. So it does take confidence to be simple, right? Because the thing that is easy, that is the path of least resistance, is complicated. It doesn't sound like it would be, but it really is. Because the last time you had to give a report about something that you didn't really have the answer for, right? The last time you answered a question in an interview and you didn't really have a good response for the recruiter. Well, what do? You don't just say one sentence and get out of there. You throw the whole textbook at them. You throw, a wall of words up, hoping that you said enough that you can get through it. You busted your way into the next question that people say, somewhere in, I didn't understand it, but somewhere in that wall of words, there was probably an answer. That's the easy thing to do. It takes confidence to get rid of all the things that we can hide behind, that the big words, jargon, acronyms, or just the sheer quantity of words. It takes confidence to let ourselves kind of stand out there. One of the ways we can get there is truly kind of knowing our stuff and really understanding our audience. I talk about this as one of the principles that helps us bridge the gap, which is empathy. And empathy is largely gained from talking to your audience, understanding what needs and motivations, what language are they speaking, what do they need to hear, getting out of our own bubble and understanding them. It's a no thing. People don't do it because it's awkward, because it's like to go stand on the street corner and ask somebody for their opinion on something, or call someone up and try to get feedback. People don't like to do that because they intuitively don't enjoy it, but also they're afraid that they might get feedback they don't like. So, we just avoid doing this solution that would immediately make us more confident in our answers, because we would have some sort of evidence to support it. But instead of following that, we will often shirk from that constantly back into the complicated.
So we'll get into your book just a little bit, but as you say, clear messages win. And my question is, how exactly does someone design their clear message that they want to get across?
Yeah. So I hinted at this a little bit with that empathy piece. There's 5 principles that I've identified, looking at the research, looking at case studies, historical examples, that it's not a checklist, it's not a rubric, but the better we can activate on these principles, the better we're going to be about kind of solving the problem. So the first one is beneficial, which is, what does it matter to the receiver? What's in it for them, right? Second one is focused. Are you trying to say one thing or multiple things at once? The third is salient. Does your message stand out from the crowd? Is it noticeable? The fourth is empathetic, which I just mentioned. Are you speaking in the language of the receiver? And then the fifth one is minimal. Have you cut out everything you don't need and only what is vital, what is important? And so the better we can activate on these ones, the better we're going to be at achieving clarity, about bridging that gap, and about ultimately achieving whatever our goal is with our communication.
So if I'm a leader I'm a big systems guy, and I like to have as many systems in place to help me with my day-to-day tasks and things like that. If I'm a leader looking for a system to put in place to help with my communication within my organization, where do you think I should start?
Oh boy. So that's a good question. I would say the first piece of this is, and I lied a little bit by saying they're not in order, but the first one is beneficial. This is the kind of 101 piece of marketing and sales that is so often forgotten, or is maybe known but is not activated upon. And so what we mean by beneficial is, kind of marketing 101. We don't buy features, we buy benefits. Putting this mindset on, which is that every time you're trying to talk to somebody in a way that you're trying to persuade them to do some sort of action, if it's buy something, decision, you change a policy, we'd only do that because of what the outcome of that thing is. We don't want the thing, we want what it gets. There's a sentence that I tell my students every semester, and I tell them, if you forget everything else in this entire course, in this entire degree you're getting, if you remember this, you're going to be ahead of most other people in marketing. And it's not mine, I can't take credit. It's from Theodore Levitt, who's a Harvard professor from the 60s. He said, people don't want a 1/4-inch drill, they want a 1/4-inch hole. They don't want a 1/4-inch drill, they want a 1/4-inch hole. They don't want the thing, they want what the thing does for them. And I would argue actually further on this, right? I didn't want the 1/4-inch hole, I want the family photo up on the wall, right? And actually, I don't even want the family photo up on the wall. I want the sense of like love and belonging that I had when I walked by it in the hallway. So, there's a system I have in the book where we can identify, we can kind of get down to that motivational level and then build back up, and in a way that's a very structured form of communication. And I call it kind of the drill build method in the book. This is the one change. If you're saying we want to shift our methodology, we want to shift the way we look at our communication, the more you can talk about benefits, the better you're going to resonate with what actually moves audience action.
Have you seen, speaking of benefits, when I think of trying to push benefits on somebody, the message that I'm trying to get across, I think of like trying to sell somebody on something. Have you seen in the past, and this is kind of a off-topic question, but how important is it to back up those benefits and not just tell them, here's what it could do for you, and I just want to get this off my plate, and this is what it can do for you. I'm not going to worry about if it actually happens or not. How often have you seen that, and what kind of effect has it had on people?
Oh yeah, so it's funny. So the word "because" is this like magic word that it helps people, even if there's no real connection between what comes before and after that word, it helps people be okay with some statement, to think that some statement makes sense, to buy your thing or let you do whatever. There's a famous study, and I'm going to butcher the details of it here, that there was like a student, or the researcher basically went to people waiting in line at a photocopier and said, can I cut you in line? And people mostly said no. Like, why would I let you cut you in line? But if you said, can I cut you in line because I'm in a hurry, or because I want to make copies, because I need to make copies, that's not a real reason. You could say, I can cut you in line because my train is leaving, soon, or because my class is starting soon. Well, okay, that's a reason. People will accept that. But even when you just made a kind of, circular logic reason, which is, can I cut you in line because I need to make copies, just by putting that word "because" in, most people went, okay, you can go ahead and cut me. You can go ahead and go in front there. So, there's a very real connection with when we talk about benefits, but there's also this like, I don't want to sound like it's manipulative or anything, but there is also a certain magic in even the appearance of talking about benefits.
Yeah. So it's always good for leaders to evaluate themselves, do self-evaluations on their impactfulness or their effectiveness as a leader. If I'm a leader that wants to self-reflect on kind of how good or bad I've been doing at communicating, what's a good measurement for that? What can I look for? that tells me, yeah, you're doing a pretty good job, or you need to work on this or this?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's probably what is the goal of that communication, right? I mean, are you being effective in informing and persuading? I mean, those are the two kind of big buckets of why we communicate: to inform, and to persuade. Did you achieve the goals of your communication in those two buckets? If you didn't, which said you probably want to reverse engineer and say, well, where did it fall apart, right? And this is not in my work, but there's kind of the famous like the 5 whys. Mod, have you heard of this before? I think it's from Toyota originally back in like the 80s or 90s.
I don't think so.
The idea is, well, a problem happened. Let's ask why 5 times, and eventually you get down to the root cause of it. So at some point, the root cause might be communication, and then well, why didn't the communication work? And that helps you interrogate, saying, okay, well, it wasn't beneficial, or it wasn't focused, or it wasn't one of those other principles that we've outlined here.
So we've talked a little bit about your book, but I kind of want to dive into some things that, if I'm listening to this podcast and I get the message, clear messaging wins, and I'm interested in your book. What's some things that you would say that I need to look for first in your book, and what can I take from it to apply to my own life?
Yeah, so there's I joke, like, it's a 208-page book about how to say things simply, right? Like, it seems like I didn't really take my own advice on this. I fully understand the irony to this. So how do you justify the other 207 pages? And I say, listen, if it's just enough to hear that you should say things simply, that you should write things simply, then don't buy the book, right? Then don't read the book, don't get the rest of it. But if you want to understand the why and the how, that is what the other 12 chapters of the book are about, or 11, whatever it's going to be. The first piece is about the why, which, well, why is it? Because I always believe that understanding the kind of science behind something and history behind something gives us a better foundation to make sense of it and to see where kind of the puck is going a lot of times. We talk about how our brains work, we talk about how memory work, talk about how do things kind of get from outside, stick into our head and make sense of them. And then why is it that simplicity is so effective in that circumstance? And I in that piece, when I talk about why complication is the big problem and why we're so often pulled in that direction. So that piece there, if you want to, is the it's at the beginning of the book. That's the most important piece in terms of understanding what these other parts develop. But if you want to look at those 5 principles that we talked about, that's going to be the second half of the book. And I mentioned before, I would say beneficial is the most important one to really kind of start with. And then after that, I would say, the only other thing that I would put out there is, like, talk about sequential. If you're really looking to kind of hunt and peck, minimal at the end is important, because it's about everything you need, but only what you need. And it's hard to know that unless you have gone through and interrogated your work through the other steps. So those 2 are on purpose where they are. The other ones are, we kind of activate upon them depending on what your needs dictate.
So kind of give my listeners a little bit of an idea of the work you do or have done, and kind of, to help people improve as communicators and help them get their messages across.
Yeah. So I've mentioned before, I ran a marketing agency for 10 years. We would be in the trenches, right? Brand would come to us, client would come to us and say, I got this thing. I need people out there in the world to know about this thing. And we would figure out how to tell that story, right? And it would be in a billion ways. Today, since I've sold that agency, I'm less kind of in the execution point, and much more in the kind of coaching, advisory, training, speaking of that universe, where I can kind of have more leverage to be able to teach people, how do we do this? Some of the work I do personally involves audits where I'll go in, someone says, hey, we have, this big chunk of messaging, and usually it's a website or it could be a presentation or something. And what I'll do is I'll evaluate it. I'll look at these principles. I'll look at how it can improve, and help them in kind of collaborative way to change that piece of messaging. And I don't just necessarily take it and say, I'm going to, make these edits and get back to you, because that's not empowering them to be able to do this. I look to say, okay, well, let's look at this piece together, and let's evaluate, saying, okay, well, this headline, is this saying we want to say, who is your audience? What do we want to connect? Well, what are the big takeaways? And through that collaborative process, it ends up being, this empowering thing where that team can go out and work also on their other brochure or their other document or their other landing page, instead of just coming in and coming back over and over again. It's not kind of a copyright work, more so it's a training piece.
Yeah. Well, one question I like to end most of my episodes with, and it's kind of a personal question, but what do you want your legacy to be? What do you want Ben Gutman to be remembered by? And what do you want people to think of you when you're gone?
Oh boy. So the legacy stuff is interesting. I've always been much more focused on the kind of here and now, and try to be cognizant. It sounds kind of macabre or maybe not macabre, but maybe what's the other word I'm thinking of? To say, okay, well, in 200 years, no one's going to remember any of us, right? I look at it saying, in the moment when I'm here, can somebody's life better, I'll be happy about that. There's I'm talking to you from Queens right now. We have a place upstate in the Catskills, and when I'm working there, I sit out and I look at these trees on our lawn. I say, these trees have been here much longer than I have. If my legacy is that by the time I'm gone, these trees are still here, I'll be a happy man. That's how I look at it, is what can I do in the moment, and then how can I leave this as good or a better place than it was when I got here.
Yeah. Well, Ben, that's going to wrap it up today. I really appreciate the insight, and I know I got better from listening to your stuff about communication, and I think communication is something that can be applied to any aspect of life, any industry, and I think it's very important that people continually work on being better communicators, and hopefully they check out your book and to help themselves out in becoming a better communicator. So I really want to thank you for coming on today, and I look forward to checking out your book and following you the rest of the way.
Awesome. Bo, this has been a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Lead to Win podcast. If you're listening this week, make sure to drop a rating on whatever app you're listening on. I'd love to hear from listeners and make this podcast even more relevant to you. Also, make sure to follow the Lead to Win podcast on social media. We're on Facebook, X, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Give us a follow and feel free to share the content. Again, thanks for listening this week. I'm your host, Bo Bergen. See you next Tuesday.